Well, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our final session, session number 6. And hopefully everybody was able to get some great information from Dr. Stanier. Session number 6 will be with Dr. Stephen Duren, PhD, founder of Performance Horse Nutrition. His talk will be on feeding the laminitic horse, the importance of a forage-first diet. Bio for Dr. Stephen is excuse me. He is a native of Soda Springs, Idaho, completed his Bachelor of Science in Animal Science at the University of Idaho. Dr. Duren is the founder of Performance Horse Nutrition. He earned a Master's of Science and his PhD in equine nutrition and exercise physiology from the University of Kentucky. Dr. Duren is recognized by the American Registry of Professional Animal Scientists as a member in good standing. He is also a member of the Equine Science Society, where he served as a board of directors member. Fun facts about Dr. Duren. Well, he's got a lot of fun facts. One, he's my best friend and mentor. Number 2, he utilizes horses in his 2 favorite hobbies: wilderness camping, hunting, and cattle ranching. The final fun fact, and something that I just learned about Dr. Duren recently, was if you all tuned into the Kentucky Derby, the horse that won, Rich Strike, he actually exercised horses out of that farm while he was working on his PhD. Dr. Duren, he will be talking about laminitis and the importance of a forage-first diet. So if you've been intrigued by all the forage talk that we've had lately, this is going to be a great one to tune into. He visited with us last year on forages, and it was just a tremendous talk. The poll question for this session, make sure to go answer that, is which of these factors do you most commonly associate with the risk of laminitis? Number 1, genetic or bloodline predisposition. Number 2, high grain diets. Number 3, access to lush or rich pasture. Number 4, Cushing's, insulin resistance, and other metabolic issues. Number 5, weight or obesity. And lastly, crusty neck. Make sure to go answer that question so we can capture all that and share at the end. So without further ado, here is Dr. Steve Duren.
Thank you, Michael, for that nice introduction. Again, it's an honor to be selected to be a presenter, if you will, for the Equa Summit for Kemen. I appreciate Kemen putting together this educational opportunity, and I'm also excited about talking to you about the laminitic horse and the importance of a forage-first diet in feeding those horses. So again, I want to express my gratitude for Kemen for taking the initiative, taking the lead, and providing an educational opportunity for horse owners. I think this is very important because with education, I think we get much better at feeding our horses and then hopefully don't have as many issues with them. I would also like to thank Stanley Premium Western Forage. Stanley Premium Western Forage is sponsoring my talk today, so I appreciate that. And Stanley is the maker, the grower of high quality premium Western forages for the equine market. To get started, what I'd like to do is kind of outline what I hope to accomplish in this talk. And so what I'd like to do to begin with is define the anatomy of what we're talking about, define the leg anatomy and also the hoof anatomy of the horse, so we understand the structures and what potentially can go wrong. Then I'm going to explain laminitis, what it is, what happens during that time period when horses do become laminitic. We're going to talk about some of the symptoms of laminitis. How can you look at your horse and determining he may be having a laminitic bout? So some of the symptoms to look for. We'll talk about the potential causes of laminitis. There are many of those, and we'll go through those and talk about those. Then we're going to put together some diets for feeding these laminitic horses, and these diets are going to be based on what caused the laminitis. So a more scientific approach to how we feed these horses that are having laminitic bouts. So to get started, let's talk a little bit about anatomy. On the right-hand side of this particular slide is the front leg of a horse shown from the knee down. So it's the bones of the lower leg. And that actually begins with the third metacarpal bone. Most people know that by the common name, also called the cannon bone. Then we move further down or further distal in the leg, and you have the proximal phalanx, which is the long pastern, the middle phalanx, which is the short pastern, and then the distal phalanx. The distal phalanx is known as the coffin bone. It's also sometimes called the pedal bone, and that's the most distal, or that's the bone that's on the end of the leg. So it's the furthest away from the body. Now, that coffin bone is actually suspended in the hoof capsule. That coffin bone does not touch the ground. Okay, so the bones of the horse skeleton do not actually touch the ground. That coffin bone is actually suspended in that hoof capsule. It's actually bonded, if you will, to the hoof wall. So that bonding actually keeps the bones of the leg, the weight of the horse, from pushing those bones through the bottom of the foot. So that binding, if you will, or bonding of the coffin bone to the hoof wall is critical to keep those bones from coming through the bottom of the foot. In laminitis, we have the lamina. The lamina are the tissues that actually secure the coffin bone to the hoof wall. And I've shown those schematically here to the left. And as you can see, this contains an extensive blood supply. It is also highly enriched with nerves as well. So it's a very sensitive tissue. The lamina is the tissue, the sole tissue that's responsible for securing that coffin bone and holding that coffin bone in place in the hoof capsule. In laminitis, we have inflammation of that lamina in the hoof capsule. In that inflammation, we have an altered blood flow to the lamini, and we also have an enzyme cascade, if you will, that begins to destroy that sensitive lamina tissue. Once that lamina is damaged in some way, either from an altered blood flow or enzyme destruction, that lamina can die. If it dies, it loses its grip on that coffin bone. Okay, it's no longer able to hold it in the proper position in that hoof capsule. So then the weight of the horse pushes those bones down. The pull of the deep digital flexor tendon pulls that coffin bone, the point of it, towards the sole of the foot, and those bones can actually protrude through the bottom of the hoof capsule. So if you look at this diagram, on the left-hand side, we actually have the normal foot. And you can see that coffin bone is suspended in that hoof capsule. And you can see the distance in the amount of hoof wall between the bone. That's properly suspended. In the diagram on the right, we see a laminitic situation where the lamina have lost their grip on that coffin bone. Then the weight of the horse and the pull of the deep digital flexor tendon has rotated that coffin bone down, and it has sunk in that particular hoof capsule. That coffin bone is now nearly protruding the hoof capsule at the sole. So what are some of the symptoms of laminitis? And the symptoms depend on the severity of the bout of laminitis. One of the main things that we see is lameness. These horses will have the appearance that they're walking on eggshells. That lameness will actually be worse when the horse is circling. When that hoof is contacting the ground and the horse is turning or rotating that particular hoof, those tissues are very sensitive. And if they're damaged, the horse will be extremely lame. Because of changes in blood flow, we have a strong digital pulse, and we also get the appearance of the horse in a sawhorse stance. And the picture shown on the right-hand side shows a horse in just that, where that horse is rocking backwards in an attempt to take weight off of those damaged tissues, those very sore feet. This horse is rocked backwards, and that's because most of the laminitic bouts are in the front feet, but they can occur in any of the four feet. Other symptoms that you get with a horse with laminitis is a very strong pain response when you use hoof testers on the sole. So those horses are very sensitive to that pressure. They'll have weight shifting, again, trying to take weight off of a damaged hoof or a damaged hoof capsule. The hoof will be warm to the touch. This is shunting of blood flow. These horses will be anxious, visible trembling, and this is simply associated with the pain. Laminitis is an extremely painful disease for horses, and they're very, very uncomfortable. These horses will have abnormal radiographs or x-rays. The upper left-hand picture is a normal suspension of the coffin bone in the hoof capsule. And you can see on the lower picture, you can see how that has rotated down in a laminitic situation. Because of this rotation, you'll also see that will change the abnormal or create abnormal hoof conformation. Those are some of the symptoms. Now, what causes laminitis? The take-home message, or one of the take-home messages I hope you get, is that laminitis is the possible result of many disease conditions. In other words, laminitis is not a disease. Laminitis is a symptom of many different diseases or many different causes. So what are some of the things that can cause laminitis? Grain overload. How does that work? If a horse overconsumes grain, it breaks into the feed room and helps itself. That grain, the starch and sugar content of it, is designed to be enzymatically digested in the small intestine. When they get a flush or a large amount of that grain, it bypasses the ability of the small intestine to get it digested, bypasses into the hindgut, which is a fermentation vat, and those bacteria end up fermenting the grain. They ferment the grain, lower the pH, ends up killing bacteria, changes gut permeability, toxins are absorbed, and laminitis can occur. Lush grass, spring and fall. Well, why would that have an effect? Remember, lush grass is mostly sugar. So for the same reason grain overload can cause laminitis, lush grass in both the spring and the fall can also cause laminitis. Colic or diarrhea, any disruption in that hindgut. When we destroy or alter that equine microbiome, the bacteria, the microbial population in that hindgut, when we disrupt them, bad things can actually happen. We can have infections, such as a retained placenta can cause laminitis. Other systemic infections can also cause laminitis. So anytime bacteria get into the bloodstream, they can result in a laminitic bout. We can have toxins from things that horses consume. Black walnut bedding is a primary cause of laminitis. We can also get laminitis from ergot alkaloids associated with fescue and other things that horses eat. We can have laminitis from drug reactions. The injection of corticosteroids has been known to cause laminitis in certain horses. Other causes of laminitis: equine metabolic syndrome, PPID, Cushing's, insulin resistance. Metabolic issues can cause laminitis in horses, and that's primarily because of a dysregulation between glucose and insulin production. If your horse has had a previous laminitic bout, he's more inclined to do it again. We can also have laminitis from excessive exercise. They call that road founder. Okay, a sudden change in diet, again, altering that gut microbiome. Then finally, other causes of laminitis: uneven weight bearing. Okay, this typically happens when a horse has an injured leg and they shift their weight to the non-injured leg for support, and that non-injured leg can actually develop laminitis. Inactivity, obesity, again, this disrupts the normal glucose insulin dynamic, and these horses can become laminitic. Genetics, there's certain types of horses that are more prone, and I think that has more to do with they're prone to be obese and other issues like that ultimately lead to laminitis. Frosted grass. Why would frosted grass cause laminitis? Okay, when the sun shines on the grass and produces sugar, okay, the plant will rapidly gain sugar during the daylight hours. Then at night, it respires those sugars and creates more complicated carbohydrates fiber. When it's cold, the plant won't grow. It just accumulates sugar. So frosted grass can be a laminitic cause. So what I hope to get from all those causes of laminitis, that laminitis again is a possible result. It's a symptom of many different disease conditions. So what do we do from a treatment standpoint? I'm a nutritionist, not a veterinarian, but it is absolutely a medical emergency. You need to treat this as a medical emergency. For those of you that have had a laminitic horse and suffered with the pain that they had to suffer with and the debilitating disease that it is, we're far better to try to prevent laminitis than treat laminitis. The very survival of the horse actually depends on how severe the laminitis. Some horses get laminitis so severely they can't survive. Those that do survive may never be athletic again. They may never come back to 100% of their performance potential. They may, at best, be sound where those horses can be turned out and be able to get around. Veterinarians will typically use different pain medications, anti-inflammatories. From a management standpoint, these horses are often in deep, soft bedding. Sand is a great example of that. And there's absolutely a barrier involved working with your veterinarian in trying to get that horse as comfortable as possible. The other thing we need to know about treating laminitis is laminitis elevates energy requirements. And it does that because the inflammatory response, the healing response in horses actually increases calorie requirement. Okay, so if you're not feeding more calories to that horse, it can be catabolic. In other words, they'll break down tissues to try to fuel the healing response. So weight loss is common in laminitic horses, the stress, the pain, the increased energy requirement of the healing process. So we must manage these horses with laminitis. We must plan the diet and try to do the best we can in our feeding programs. So let's move into how we feed these horses with laminitis. What I've done is I've taken all the potential causes of a laminitic event and I've classified them into 4 general causatory factors for producing laminitis. And those factors are feed-related causes, sepsis causes, okay, from an infection or a toxin, causes that are endocrine in nature, and then the final group, those that are mechanical in nature. All those can cause laminitic events, and all those require different dietary intervention. So regardless of the cause of laminitis, we need to focus on the forage component of the diet, okay? Horses on a daily basis, when they're healthy, the largest single ingredient they take in on a daily basis is the forage component of the diet, that being either hay or pasture. So they're designed to ferment fiber. That's what they do. And we need to concentrate our healing diets on their innate ability and their structure to be able to digest fiber. So forage will always be the single largest ingredient in the diet, but we must select the proper forage because forage is different. They'll bring different things nutritionally to the table that will actually help these horses survive or make the laminitis condition worse. So let's first talk about feed-related laminitis. Okay, how do we feed those horses? Well, remember that the feed-related laminitis, those are from carbohydrate overload, too much grain, lush pasture, spring or fall, or frosted grass. Again, what happens is you overwhelm the ability of the small intestine to get it digested, spills into the hindgut, fermented by bacteria, they produce acid, and derails the microbial population in the hindgut. Sudden dietary change, again, messing with those microbes in the hindgut. All of those result in hindgut function disruption. So too much sugar, too much starch, bypassing the small intestine, Okay, and that's shown on the left here as a circle. That's the small intestine. That's where those sugars and starches are supposed to be digested. If they're not, they spill into that large hindgut or fermentation vat and will actually be fermented by bacteria. We don't want that to happen. So when we feed these feed-related laminitic cases, one of the things we want to eliminate to begin with is we want to eliminate the grain portion of the diet. Most of the grains that we feed to performance horses, to young growing horses, etc., are grain-based, so they provide a lot of sugar. However, we've eliminated that, but they still require vitamins and minerals. They require those to heal. So I always recommend feeding a low intake, concentrated protein, vitamin, mineral balancer pellet. Very important. The forage component of the diet, the largest single component of the diet, we want to provide a low starch, sugar hay. Okay. We don't want to give them access to pasture. Horses will not self-regulate on pasture intake, and there's a lot of sugar at certain times of the day in pasture grass. So in feed-related laminitis, what's the hay of choice? Well, we want to go for our low sugar, low starch hays. So the C4 grasses that those are teff and Bermuda are two classic candidates for the low sugar hay. Also, alfalfa. Now, alfalfa contains a lot of calories and a lot of protein, but it's also low in sugar, so that can be utilized as well. For these horses with feed-related laminitis, I want a sugar and ESC plus starch content less than 10%. We also want to not get that horse back to ideal weight. We want to live with a horse that's 10% below optimum weight. Again, we're taking body weight, we're taking weight that horse carries off those damaged feet until he has opportunity to heal. If low sugar hay is not available, it's an emergency situation, you can't get your hands on a grass hay or a legume hay that's low in sugar, tested low in sugar, can we reduce the sugar content of our current hay? And we can soak that hay. And that reduces the amount of water-soluble carbohydrate. So typically a 30 to 60 minute soak in warm water can reduce the sugar content on average about 31%. So viable, you can do that. We want to discard the water that hay was soaked in and rinse that hay off prior to giving it to horses. Now, the next group of laminitic cases are what I call fall into the sepsis category. This is a toxin is produced. That toxin can be from an infection of bacteria within the bloodstream, such as occurs in a retained placenta or peritonitis. We can have a toxin associated with, again, black walnut bedding or an ergot alkaloid that could be something like fescue. We can also get a septic situation with a diarrhea or colic. If we get a disruption to the hindgut to the point that the gut becomes leaky, okay, permeable to things that aren't supposed to cross the barrier, we can get bacteria and other toxins leak into the bloodstream, and they can cause a laminitic bout. So how do we feed those horses? The first step is we must diagnose the primary cause of the problem and then treat that medically. So if it's a toxin from the diet, such as black walnut or the ergot alkaloids, we must eliminate that source. But we need to remember the basic diet, okay, what the horse ate day in and day out was really not what caused his laminitic issue. So in these sepsis-caused laminitic horses, we don't change the hay, we don't change the source of hay. We don't want a big dietary change that can make the situation worse. In this case, we leave them on the same hay. We eliminate pasture. Okay, we don't want them to take in the high sugar content of that. Also, these horses are usually sore enough they won't move around and consume pasture adequate anyway. We want to minimize or eliminate grain. I do that because a lot of these horses are on stall rest, and the balancer is a completely appropriate way to get those nutrients into that horse. Oftentimes, these horses will also be fed supplements. There's lots of good supplements on the market that are gut healing, that will heal the tissue, will heal the leaky gut syndrome, if you will. they'll also reestablish a normal microbiome in that horse's hind leg. Okay, what about endocrine-related laminitis? Okay, things like equine metabolic syndrome, PPID or Cushing's, insulin resistance, corticosteroids, obesity, all these mess with the endocrine system. And by disrupting the endocrine system, they can cause a laminitic bowel. It is now thought this is the leading cause of laminitis in domesticated horses, is endocrine factors. So what happens in these endocrine factors is these metabolic diseases actually cause a cell dysfunction specific to the endothelial cell. These cells control blood flow. These cells control the nutrients that go into that sensitive lamina. And by modifying blood flow to the lamina, you can actually get damage or death of those lamina, and they lose the grip on that coffin bone, and then you've got a laminitis situation. Typically, those metabolic diseases work on the negative effects that high insulin has and high cortisol has on those endothelial cells. So again, this metabolic is the #1 cause of laminitis. It's a cellular dysfunction caught on by abnormal hormones or endocrine factors, most likely insulin to be the primary culprit. So what do we do as far as feeding those horses? We certainly need to start with working with your veterinarian to medically treat the endocrine system. Okay, we need to get ahead of this when the horse is overweight or the horse is starting to show some of the signs of different metabolic diseases. We need to get ahead of that before laminitis occurs. Remember that laminitis that is endocrine related revolves around insulin. Okay, insulin is produced in an effort to store sugar out of the blood into tissues. So we want to minimize the high insulin spikes by minimizing sugar and starch intake. Eliminate pasture, eliminate grain. We want to feed that balancer pellet. From the forage standpoint, again, we got to go back to those low sugar and starch hays. So that's, again, our teff and our Bermuda. If you don't have those, we need to soak those. Again, we want the sugar and starch low, less than 10% of the total diet. And we want those horses to have a modest weight loss, 10% below optimum, again, to carry less weight on those damaged tissues. Now, the final cause or group causes of laminitis are what I term the mechanical related laminitis. And this can be such as support limb laminitis, uneven weight bearing. This racehorse off to the right-hand side was a very famous racehorse, Barbaro, that got injured. And because he got injured, they're trying to keep his weight off of those feet. That horse will naturally want to take weight off that damaged leg and put it on the non-damaged leg as weight bearing, and that can induce laminitis. And in fact, it did in this particular horse. We can have mechanical laminitis from road founder, excessive convulsive force. So diet is not what caused the laminitic bout at all. So again, in feeding these mechanical related lamini, we don't want to change the hay type or source. We do want to take them off pasture. We want to minimize grain. Okay, we can feed the bouncer. But the other important thing to remember with these mechanical laminitis horses is they're typically athletic horses. They're fit. They have a high rate of metabolism. If you take away all the grain, okay, this horse is going to have a massive weight loss. What I'm telling you is take away the grain, but replace the calories. So again, they get more hay than potentially they were getting before. In addition, though, they get other sources of calories that are safe for them to eat. Okay, things like beet pulp, a fiber source, a super fiber source that has the same calorie content as oats, but is a fiber which is safe to feed. We can add fat to these horses' diet, vegetable oils as a means of replacing those calories. So in summary, hopefully what we've learned today is the coffin bone is held in the hoof capsule by tissue called the lamina. In laminitis, we have inflammation of those lamina, and that can cause changes in circulation, changes in enzyme cascades, which can actually damage the lamina. The damaged lamina are unable to hold the coffin bone in position. So then the weight of the horse, the pull of the deep digital flexor tendon, drive the bones of the leg through the bottom of the foot. Okay, very debilitating, very painful condition in horses. So these horses are going to be extremely lame. We've learned that there are many different diseases that will show a symptom of laminitis. And to feed these horses properly, we must actually consider, why did this laminitic bout occur, and then design a diet accordingly. For those horses that are feed-related or endocrine-related laminitis, certainly the low sugar starch forages will help in those horses. Typically, in those horses, we also eliminate grain, but don't eliminate nutrient source because it helps healing. So those horses will get a low intake, concentrated balancer pellet. Also, we tend to supplement these horses, supplement them for gut health, where we're trying to repair damaged digestive tissue. We're trying to re-inoculate or reestablish normal microbiome in the gut. Those are certainly warranted. People will often feed a hoof supplement. Those are warranted as well in trying to help regrow that damaged hoof structure. So with that, I will quit, and I will entertain any questions that you might have about feeding the laminitic horse and the importance of high quality forage in those diets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Duren. As always, there's a lot there that we can learn and we can apply to how we manage horses on a day-to-day basis. So we have some terrific questions coming in, and Ken actually had a terrific comment. Ken, can you expand on that?
Oh, Dr. Duren, I always learn something from you. It's pretty easy to teach me something, but you do a good job. So the key point for me is that the endocrine laminitis is by far the biggest deal now, by far. And so we know that insulin is toxic directly to the lamina. So, we want to, and I agree 100%, we want to prevent these. I've had my own horses I had to put down over this. And this is no fun for a veterinarian to treat this disease at all. So speculation on your part, this is total speculation. With the importance of insulin dynamics, could chromium be important to try and optimize insulin efficiency? Not that chromium is going to prevent laminitis, but could you draw a line that it might be important?
Yeah, I think, Ken, it absolutely can. As you well know, and certainly many of the viewers know, chromium actually potentiates or helps the action of insulin. So it helps take that sugar out of the bloodstream and helps it drive it into tissues. So by potentiating the action of insulin, you need less insulin secreted to get rid of the same amount of sugar. So absolutely, I mean, you could draw that line. I've not seen any research to that degree yet, but certainly you could make a scientific case for that.
Thank you.
Terrific. So we have two questions that came in from Jose Rodriguez, and I'd like to address both of these at the same time if possible. He has a question. It says, would you mind explaining how the frosted glass can produce laminitis? He didn't quite understand that reference. And then the second part of that is, can you further reduce the amount of water-soluble carbohydrates if you saute for 2 hours or longer?
Okay, so the first question on frosted grass. So the sun, through the process of photosynthesis, shines on the forage, and then it produces, during the bright sunshine of the day, it produces sugar, simple carbohydrate. Then at night, the plant normally respires or utilizes that simple carbohydrate, turns it into more complicated carbohydrate, fiber, and the plant grows. So in the case of frosted grass, you still have the sunshine that's actively producing the sugar in the grass, but at night it is cold. And because it's cold, that plant will not utilize that carbohydrate, instead stores that sugar because it thinks it's going to die, and it will not grow and it will not turn that carbohydrate into fibrous carbohydrate. So in the case of frosted grass, it's just accumulating sugar to survive the winter, but not turning it into fiber where the plant would actually grow. That occurs in the warmer months.
Very good. Well, perfect. So would soaking that forage longer than, say, 2 hours or more, would that further reduce the NSC content? Or, I mean, is there a limited amount? Is there a cap on soaking?
There is absolutely a cap. Once you get to about an hour, then the declines in sugar after that are relatively small. If you're doing that in warm weather, you also then have the increased chance of that hay becoming susceptible to mold and other issues. So typically that hour, we try to speed that with the use of warm water rather than cold water. And so that seems to be kind of the sweet spot, or the maximum spot, if you will, is about 1 hour of soaking.
Terrific. Well, Teresa Reth has a question. It is, what are your what are your thoughts on using grazing muzzles?
Okay, so grazing muzzles, there's been a lot of research on those, and those absolutely work to decrease the pasture intake or dry matter intake of a horse. So if you have a situation where you want your horse to get some exercise in a pasture environment, but you figured out that you actually don't have a horse, you have a vacuum cleaner on 4 legs, and he never picks his head up and just overconsumes forage. So in those cases, that overconsumption of forage would certainly produce an obesity situation. If it's a high sugar forage, it could have some insulin issues. So utilizing a grazing muzzle and slowing down that intake, reducing that intake is absolutely appropriate.
Terrific. Well, that's a really good note for us. Okay, so we have another question coming in from Katie. Katie asks, this past winter, I had a horse that was on a very restricted diet with no other changes besides very cold weather. Could it be linked to hindgut dysbiosis? Vet was not able to come up with an answer as to what caused a laminitic episode.
Yeah, so certainly, where the veterinarian wasn't able to pinpoint a specific cause, you could have had, some disruption with the microbiome that could have triggered the laminitic episode. Or here's just another theory, and of course, I didn't see the horse and I don't know. What if that horse was just chronically overweight? Okay, he was on a restricted diet. Again, we don't know if the diet was restricted because of another health problem, or they were just trying to control the weight. If that horse is slightly overweight, okay, you may finally reach that magic threshold where insulin becomes high and you trigger a very subtle laminitic event. And we see this oftentimes where people will say, I didn't change anything. The horse is completely normal. And then I let him in out of the pasture one day and he was foot sore. Okay, we started a laminitic episode. So that chronic obesity, if that were the reason for his diet manipulation or diet restriction, it could have been just a gradual creep of the insulin level to a point where then you got a problem with the lamina.
Okay, terrific. So I have a question. It's a little out there. It's just, I guess, food for thought for everybody. And that is the correlation between cortisol from stress and how cortisol can disrupt insulin function. What are your thoughts on horses that are chronically stressed? Do you think they're potentially at risk of laminitis just caused by that cortisol production?
Yes, absolutely, because cortisol, fight or flight hormone, it dumps glucose into the system. Well, once the glucose is in the system, then the insulin takes over and trying to put that into tissues that will actually use that. So you get an elevated insulin. So yes, horses that are chronically stressed or chronically perceived stress with higher cortisol levels often follow with higher insulin levels as well. And then as Dr. Kopp pointed out, that insulin is actually toxic to the lamina. to the endothelial cells, and that is certainly a potential cause of the laminitic episode.
So, Michael, you can actually create insulin resistance by giving exogenous corticosteroids, triamcinolone, Depo-Medrol. You can create insulin resistance. So Dr. Duren's logic is spot on.
Terrific. So are there any early warning signs of laminitis that we could be looking for so we could begin treatment early?
Yeah, the early warning signs go for those horses that are of the endocrine causes, the equine metabolic syndrome, the Cushing's horses or PPID horses, horses with chronic obesity. You've got to be able to see that, because in the case of obesity, if your horse is thin or fat, it's your fault, because the only dietary factor that you can actually control or see in the feeding program of your horse is weight gain and weight loss. It's hard to look at the horse and say, he looks a little bit selenium puny today. Okay. But weight gain and weight loss, you can see. You can document that on your camera, on your cell phone. Take a picture of the horse, take another picture of the horse 30 days later. Is that horse gaining weight? Absolutely. If you can intervene in that, okay, you can stop a lot of that laminitic episode. And one of the analogies I often use in a lot of the producer seminars that we do is I show them a picture of a horse that's generally thin, and not just a little bit thin. I mean, call the police thin. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then in the next slide, I show a horse that's very obese. And I said, which one are you more likely to call the authorities on? And they all the time say the thin horse. Okay. That thin horse is not in as much peril as that overweight horse with the chronic inflammatory issues going on because of the obesity. But we're trained to think that the thin is the immediate danger when I disagree. I think the horse that's overweight with the potential for laminitis and other diseases is in far more peril than the actual thin horse.
Very good. I would like to take a minute to remind everybody, if you scroll to the very bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A section. So I want to make sure that we can address everybody's questions. So make sure to add those questions as we move through. One other note to take into consideration is in the Equitox section, in the extended learnings, if you go back to our main the main hall, you can access a presentation through Stanley by Dr. Duren that has even more learnings. It's an additional 10-minute or give or take presentation from Dr. Duren on how to feed horses and some products that Stanley offers that might be a good solution for you. Let's take one more question, and then we'll wrap up. Is alfalfa hay, and you kind of addressed this, but I would like to talk about this in relation to laminitic horses. Is alfalfa hay bad for horses, laminitic horses?
Okay, so we need to think about, I generally try not to think of a hay as good hay or bad hay. What I try to think of it instead is, what does that particular hay bring to the table? So alfalfa hay is a high calorie hay, is a high protein hay, brings lots of calcium for gastric ulcer buffering, acid buffering in the stomach, doesn't have a very good ratio of calcium to phosphorus, and by default is also low in sugar and starch. So is alfalfa bad to feed to laminitic horses? Depends on what we're trying to accomplish. A laminitic horse that's gotten very thin, that has gotten through some of the acute phase of laminitis, that we're starting to put just a little more condition on because he lost so much condition, that alfalfa provides a higher calorie, non-grain fiber source, okay, that can actually help that horse gain weight. So it's not necessarily bad. We need to just think, what does it bring to the table? And then how can I use that in the feeding program of that horse to speed healing or facilitate healing?
Terrific. Well, thank you very much. And Dr. Duren, thank you for that great presentation and answering everybody's questions. As you and I have talked about before, that's the most commonly overlooked component of a horse's diet is the forage, and it's the largest. Even on these horses that are laminitic, they're dealing with a very chronic issue. It's extremely important to focus on that first.
Absolutely.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Again, everybody, please feel free to stop by the Stanley booth in a social hour. You'll be able to connect with Dr. Duren, and he'll be happy to answer some more questions that you all have on forages, on laminitis, and just about anything equine related. He's a brilliant resource. Just to recap what we learned today. So we were able to hear from Dr. Jimmy Nichols talking about the gut, the microbiome, and the horse's second brain. Dr. Bert Stanier talking about fecal water syndrome, the importance of fiber. And then lastly, Dr. Duren talking about the importance of forages. Please make sure that you stop by the social hour, go visit our sponsors because of them and their willingness to participate in this unique opportunity that we were able to bring a bunch of science to you all. And it's because of their generosity that we're able to keep this free for everybody. We'll be live in the social hour for one more hour. Furthermore, this format will be live until June 24th. So for about the next month, give or take, you'll be able to come back in and access all these videos. After it comes off of the Six Connects format, then you'll be able to access this through our library, and so you can still be able to go in and look at these videos. A final thank you to our sponsors, Bluebonnet Feeds and Stride Animal Health, Triple Crown Feeds, Stanley Premium Western Forage, LMF Feeds, Elk Grove Milling, DAC, Easy Equine, and then of course my team here at Kemin Equine. We appreciate everybody to help make this possible. Remember that all Equisemic content, again, is available here in the virtual forum for the next couple of weeks. I appreciate everybody's attention and devoting some time to learn more about what we can do to make our horses happier and healthier. I look forward to seeing everybody over in the social hour. Feel free to stop by the Kemin Equine booth if you have any further questions.